and welcome back to Thank You for Your Attention podcast. I'm your host, Jason Beck, and with us today we have an excellent guest. We have Jens Näsström. Jens is an occupational psychologist, independent researcher, and lecturer. He's got over 17 years of experience researching and training lawyers. He's trained over 3,500 lawyers, over 18 research projects, and by his estimate, over 16,000 cups of coffee in just the last 15 years. So, quite impressive numbers. His interests are in performance and well-being for lawyers, but a lot of that can be applied to literally any profession. It's really amazing. He also does a lot with recruiting, leadership, diversity, inclusion. We talk a lot about how to adapt professionally to today's working climate. Now, that includes remote work, but also the 21st century problems of working life, which is the constant distractions, the knowledge work, how to organize your day to do the work that you want to do, the creative work that requires optimal attention. We talk a lot about lawyers, but again, it can be applied to really any professional service and discipline. So stay tuned, even if you're not a lawyer. Check them out on LinkedIn if you're interested further in this stuff. And as always, our podcast is sponsored by Larry H. Parker, Southern California's #1 automobile accident law firm. They've been successful in over 95% of their cases. They'll fight for you.
The law offices of Larry H. Parker has been successful in 95% of our cases.
We'll fight for you.
Hablamos español.
So enjoy the podcast, listen up, apply it to your own life. Let me know what works, what doesn't work, what you want more of. Please share it to friends, family, enemies, all the above. Enjoy. So Jens, thank you so much for joining me. It's a delight to talk to you. And I really wanted to have you on because you're enriched in this occupational psychologist world for many years as a practitioner and as a teacher in bringing concepts to lawyers. And especially when you do a population that has such an analytic mind. And something I'll touch on a bit later is, I come from a family of lawyers. My brother's a lawyer, my dad, my grandpa. And so I'm used to a lot of the personalities that come with being a lawyer and the great productivity and performance, as well as some of the hardships. And so to get started, what I'm interested in is how did you get into mindfulness and helping lawyers with the mind and the other areas of consultation with law firms, with selection and development in general. How did you get into this world?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's always cool to hang out and have our conversations like we've had for a few years now. I did start doing body scans as a 9-year-old spontaneously. And I was kind of interested in Buddhism early on, but when you're 11 years old and you're living in a suburb of Stockholm in the 80s, there isn't just anything around. So it sort of took a number of years, but it's always been really close to me and I always had a personal interest. But as I was getting towards the master thesis of the psychology program at the University of Stockholm, I was opting for mindfulness in work life. This is about 15 years ago. But then a fellow student encouraged me to do a study on lawyers with this mind-blowing idea that they might be stressed. And the Swedish Bar Association, they went for it. So we did a national study, and lo and behold, they were stressed, which put the Bar Association a bit on the spot. Because okay, what do we do now? So they asked me to put together full-day stress management workshops right after graduation.
Wow.
And I had no material. So it's how do I fill a full day? And so I had this little voice in the back of my head, maybe you could try mindfulness somewhere in the workshop. And I'm like, I don't know if is that going to work? I'm like, I'll just do 5 minutes towards the end, and I can run out of the room before they eat me alive or something. And it just turned out that those were the best 5 minutes of the whole day, because they got a direct experience of relaxation, of letting go of all the thinking, all the doing and everything, and going down into their bodies and letting go. And it was just so powerful, because it was like everything I had been talking about, alluding to, pointing towards, it sort of clicked for them. So that was a great experience and moment for me to see that it was able to induce that state in such a short time with total beginners.
Hmm. And it seems like you've been teaching concepts like mindfulness or about the mind for the workplace before it was cool. You've been doing it for quite a while now, and now
Yeah, I
it's a
was
very in
interested.
thing.
Yeah, really early on.
And
Sure.
so I wonder, in your experience, how has the field changed? How has your introduction to concepts when teaching things have changed through the years? Even including where we are now with the pandemic and with the shift to remote life, just seeing it from almost three stages, right? There's the beginning age of when you were first bringing in a 5-minute mindfulness section at the end of a day long, to maybe pre-COVID, for the middle years where it started to pick up as a trendy hot thing, and then now where it's everyone's talking about work-life balance in the remote life world.
Well, honestly, I think we're only scratching the surface yet, because the needs are more than ever, because of the attention economy and how the big platforms are making money on sort of attracting and holding our attention away from things. Everyone is aware of that problem right now, but it's so addictive, incredibly addictive, that it's hard to resolve. And now when many people are working in remote mode, that's an even bigger challenge. It's just screen time all the time, from the first minute you wake up until you go to bed. And then in the evening, you just sort of mix Netflix and work-related emails, and it's just a blur, which is a huge problem. So the needs are greater than ever. The interesting thing, I think, is that we have not introduced mindfulness according to the traditional formula. The traditional formula is going into retreat. It's not really, 1 hour Tuesday lunchtime or something like that.
Or 10 minutes in the morning before or after your coffee.
Yes, exactly. And I'm hoping that there will be an interest and hunger to go there, because that's really where you can go deeper and you can really transform. So the format, the way it is being taught right now is great, but I think it's a little bit of a hit and miss. Some people connect right away, a lot of people don't. So I'm hoping that there will be greater appreciation for going away and the sort of retreat transformation when you change environment and you take out scheduled time, that we become more and more aware of the importance of context, because now we have no context when we're working from home. So maybe we can start to reappreciate how we can create context for specific purposes.
If I'm going to turn my skeptical mind on as much as I can here, one thing that pops up is, well, what if retreat mode is reserved for monks and for hermits? And I'm not a monk. I'm living in the world, and I have a family, let's say, and I have obligations, and it's hard to go into retreat mode. So how do we balance that out with this need to find traditional methods of diving deeper, but then also balance that with like a societal life?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's important to remember that many monks were not just sort of sitting in a cell meditating. They were harvesting crops and administrating and so on. So it was not all that sort of shut down away. And then there is also a very deep tradition of householders who had families and work and everything, and still had profound practices. So I'm not talking about going away for weeks or months or something like that. I think a couple of weekends per year, perhaps 1 week per year, can go a really long way. Wow. To just sort of inspire you, to connect, to deepen, to get a sort of bearing on what is possible and what you're striving for. And certainly I think we do retreats already. when we go on vacation. That's a retreat from everyday life and from everyday work. And we do that because it's effective. So if you want to very quickly go into a relaxed mode, the best thing you can do is to jump on a plane the first day of your vacation, because then your body's like, hey, we're going away. Maybe we're not working where we're going. And you start to relax right away. So we can use that more consciously to make ourselves more open, because when we step off the plane, we are much more open to the colors and scents and everything. Our senses are more open because we're in a new place. And it's very natural for us to be more attentive when we are in a new place.
And that can be brought into work afterwards, after the vacation, that benefits it.
Right.
Or after the retreat, let's say.
Yes.
So just to move back a little bit, through your work, describe me the prototypical lawyer today and what they need to be prepared for. Like, what is their life like, their performance like, and some of the needs that they have?
Oh, where to start? We need to reimagine, I think, what it means to be a lawyer, because the image we have now, which includes the self-image that lawyers have themselves, is based on a professional mystique that is being created and communicated through popular media. So it can be TV series such as Suits or John Grisham novels and so on. And in them, you work really hard, and there's the brutish partner, and they are successful because they're obviously brutish, and there's a vague connection there. Yeah. But when we look at the research, it's totally opposite. The best lawyers, according to research, are the ones that are emotionally stable, they're sociable, they are competitive, they are ambitious, they have all the drive, but they're also really good at collaborating with people, and they're very good at leading themselves, and they have that sort of self-discipline in how they're managing themselves in various situations. So we need to broaden the idea of what are the factors that drive success in lawyers. And it encompasses a lot of skills that are not being trained currently anywhere. It's not being, in law school, you learn law, obviously, but you don't learn how to collaborate with other people. And then you get into the law firm and you may have a few hours of stress management or time management, but not a whole lot. So you see a stress bump initially in the career because they have only trained their sort of academic intellectual skills, but they haven't trained their skills to manage themselves or how to negotiate different situations at work. So you start by broadening that, and then you recognize that when you work as intensely as you do as a lawyer, you can't really divide. You can't say, well, well-being or feeling great is a sort of a touchy-feely bonus. Well, it's really integrated with long-term sustainable efficacy and success. So it's quite easy to work really hard and burn yourself out in a few years. But if you want to be the very best lawyer, you have to have that emotional stability. You have to be grounded. So to achieve that, you need to ensure that you're not just pushing your mind and living above your shoulders. You need to have that sort of more holistic approach to success, which sounds flaky, but it just encompasses your well-being so that you can be doing your very best, which is obvious in any other field. I mean, if you're going to be an athlete, it doesn't help if you're stressed or if you're depressed or if you haven't slept enough or anything like that. You don't show up at the track having slept 4 hours and you brag about it. That's ridiculous. But lawyers do that. They fall into that trap. So, and this is great news because it means that you don't have to choose. It's tricky to integrate both of these perspectives, but it's absolutely necessary.
One thing you mentioned about is the collaboration strengths from a lawyer, yeah. Right? It's either peer-to-peer with other lawyers, or maybe there's legal assistance and other various jobs. And something I've noticed the little time I've spent working at a law firm, not as a lawyer, of course, was that there's this massive skill divide you have lawyers in some law firms, at least. You have lawyers who have a high degree of intellectual skill that they've cultivated through years of practice, through going to law school and strengthening that intellectual ability. And then you have other workers in the law firm, secretaries, legal assistants that have a different type of training, that maybe don't have the extensive competitive cutthroat environment of law school that trained them. They have a different level of education oftentimes, and that can cause a rift between these two groups of people, lawyers and then the other members of the law firm. And I'm wondering how that can often be a source of stress, is lawyers suddenly having to do different types of skills like job development or training that they weren't trained for in law school. And then also now you throw in the wrench of remote work, and they have to communicate remotely now with those individuals. So I'm wondering how do you go about increasing those strengths for lawyers in that kind of, or speak a little bit about that issue or dilemma?
Right. I think what you're touching upon is actually leadership. And it's interesting because there are few organizations that have as much hands-on leadership as law firms. And already after a couple of years, when you're a senior associate, you lead. Actually, as a junior, you're supposed to delegate tasks to the secretary and so on. And delegation is, of course, incredibly important because that's how you train the up-and-coming lawyers that are coming after you. And that's also how you increase resources in a project. So it's absolutely critical and mandatory. At the same time, leadership is not prioritized. I mean, they all know it's important, but somehow they don't find the time, they're not motivated. You're not becoming partner because you're a great leadership material. You do it because you're a rainmaker or because you're an excellent legal thinker. And once you become a partner, then you're even less motivated. So you promote people into leadership positions that either don't have the inclination or the talent or interest for it. And then it's really hard to actually train them in that. And furthermore, you're putting them into the position of being a producing leader. In other organizations, other types of companies, you often become promoted to leadership and then you stop producing. But as a partner, you keep producing legal work, which is very important, of course. But you're dividing your time between being a producing lawyer and then being a leader. So that's where we see a kind of anemic leadership culture in many law firms, which is a very big problem. And the best way to cut through that, I think, is to train leadership before people become partners, because they're still hungry and they're still malleable. They're sort of impressive, open-minded in a different way. And to connect that to their success. If you are excellent at delegating, then you will cultivate a very dedicated team that is collaborating really well, and you will be able to keep the best associates, and you will be able to facilitate really effective, powerful workflows. So this is a traditional problem. Then when you go into remote mode, then you have an even bigger problem, because remote leadership is based on increased structure. You have to be more clear in your delegations. And then also on greater social connectivity. You need to compensate for the increased distance by being more socially engaged in your leadership, sensing how people are doing, checking in with them, instilling trust, having open conversations. That kind of dimension you need to really enhance. But then you also have, if there's not a lockdown, many law firms are going into hybrid work. So they have flexible working arrangements. Some people are coming in, some people are working from home a couple of days. This gives rise to partially distributed teams. Some people are at the office in your team, and some of them are working from home. Now you need to be even more structured, because you need to make sure that the information you're giving is symmetrically distributed. Everyone is getting the same information. So you don't have people at the office pushing the project forward, and the ones that are working from home are not being updated. So it's becoming more and more complex and more challenging. And this is very interesting because many big law firms like Linklaters and so on, they said, okay, we're going hybrid. We're not going back to the 100% office-based work. And I'm wondering, are you sure you know what the consequences are? I mean, I'm all for it. I think it's very positive, but we mustn't underestimate the challenges it entails.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned with this task delegation has a feature of emotional intelligence to it.
Yeah.
How do lawyers balance the prioritization of wanting to cultivate more skills that relate directly to being a lawyer with the skills related to being a good leader? Because you can only have so much time in the day. How do you prioritize between the two? And how do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think often, I mean, when we talk about connectivity and you need to check in with people in a remote mode, for instance, a lot of lawyers tend to think, okay, so I need to spend time with the associates online. And I think it's not necessarily the amount of time, it's the quality. So have you prepared yourself? Are you fully present and attentive? And have you prepared really sort of incisive feedback? Well, if you have, then 10 or 15 minutes will go a long way. The opposite of that is sort of having a team meeting for an hour, 90 minutes, and the partners are talking, and then the juniors are being all quiet, and it's you sort of reinforce the hierarchy in the conversation. And of course, if you ask the juniors, how are you doing? Is it difficult to work in remote? They're not going to tell you. Of course not. They're not going to tell the whole practice group and the other partner. You need to earn the trust in a one-on-one conversation. So you need to be really careful in how you are facilitating meetings and how you sort of are structuring and setting them up. And I think this is really where attention is decisive, and people feel that. Are you giving them a sort of a non-judgmental, open-minded, really authentically interested attention, or is it just sort of we need to run through these things?
You mentioned presence, and that can be somewhat a start of the woo-woo fluffy words. How do you introduce the concept of presence, of bringing a sense of presence to a meeting with another person? How do you introduce that to the analytical, skeptical mind of a lawyer?
Well, if you always have to be available, such as through your cell phone, you're never present anywhere. And I think the hallmark of professionalism to me is meeting someone who is giving me their full attention. That is the coolest thing you can do as a professional. And we all know those people that are fumbling around with their cell phones all the time, and we may even be those people without really recognizing ourselves. But yeah, it's all about that quality, that discipline, that professionalism, and also installing it as part of the group culture. Hey, let's put away our cell phones. Even if it's an online meeting, let's put it on mute, or let's put it away in a box or something like that, and give each other that attention, because we all know that this is the most effective way of running this meeting. And we know how disruptive it is. And if I pick up my cell phone, you're very likely to do it as well. It's very contagious in that. So having conversations with your colleagues and almost create like a shame culture. I think that can be effective.
A positive shame culture around technology that.
Yeah. Lawyers are very sensitive to shame. So if you can create norms or sort of shame ethic around the cell phones at the meetings, yeah, go for it.
At the meeting specifically, yeah, which is hard with also remote work, because you can hide things off camera.
Yeah.
If you even have a video screen for some meetings.
Right. And so, I mean, one thing they need to recognize as well is that you're only truly productive when you're doing deep work, when you're doing cognitively demanding work for extended amounts of time without disrupting yourself. So you need to go through your whole setup of your digital physical workspace and turn off all the notifications and so on. And you need to, I mean, your number one KPI, your key performance index, is the number of deep hours of deep work you get done in a given day. And then you need to struggle with that. And you just need to push back all the internal impulses to check your email all the time and so on. There's no way around that. although there are lots of great strategies and there's great training for it. So you don't have to figure it out all by yourself, but it's a constant battle.
Paint me the picture of a work session that is deep, and then paint the picture of the distraction or a shallow work session.
Right. So the causes and conditions for a great work session is clearly not random. It began yesterday because you were wrapping up your workday, and you were planning today, and you were setting your prospect memory. That is what you are remembering that you have to do. And then in the morning, you set yourself up and you go through the workday and you plan, and then you time block, you assign every minute of the day a specific task, such as relaxation, lunch, taking a walk outside, and work, of course. And then you have continuously made autopsies of everything that went wrong for the past quarter. Every time you lost your attention or you were disrupted by something, you do whatever you can to minimize. And you're never going to get full control. But the less control you have over your time, the more important it is that you exert full control over the time that you can actually manage. So if you only have control over 10% of your time, you need to make sure you get it all done right. If you have, no problem at all, 100%, then you can do anything you want. You will have plenty of time to get it all done, but that's not how it looks like. So saying, that I don't have control over my time, or there are so many unplanned tasks, is not an excuse. It's really the opposite. That's why you need to be disciplined, because time and attention is a limited resource that you really have to manage really, really well. And when you sit down and you get into it, you probably will struggle at first, but then you get into a flow. You break the writer's block. And the feeling when you come out of it is, hey, I'm a pretty good lawyer when I give myself the opportunity to be that. And then the opposite of it is, of course, you work really hard all day long. It's 5:30 and you recognize that you haven't begun working on that super important deadline task tomorrow. And now your belly is churning.
You haven't even worked yet, it feels like.
No, you've done busy work. You've done horizontal work. You haven't done the vertical deep work. You've been answering emails. You've been doing a lot of things. You've been working hard, but you haven't really gotten around to the actual alchemical legal work where you're turning sort of the legal lead into gold for your clients. And you need to have focus for that.
So let's say that someone's listening to this and they're that latter case. They end at 5:30 and they're like, oh, I need to finally eat some food today because I haven't eaten food today because I've only been just chugging down coffee. And I feel like I haven't even touched on my task list because they're not time blocking, which maybe we'll touch on, but they're just writing a huge task list and there's a case of files they need to go to. What is the first step that this person needs to take in order to take control of their work processes to step even one step closer to a deep work or a high performance work session?
I think recognizing that this is a perspective, a lifelong perspective, and you need to cultivate curiosity and trying things out and failing. And this is one thing you need to add to your life. So you need to start experimenting, because I can provide ideas and suggestions, but everyone has to develop their own algorithm for effective work. And so having that curiosity and having the tenacity to fail again and again, and recognizing that you're only really losing when you're stopping to fail and to learn from those failures. As long as you're learning from a failure, it's not a problem at all. It's great. It's a steep learning curve.
A lot of things you're mentioning about is like being okay with failure.
Yes.
Some people can have a hard time with that. I think you're kind of alluding to something.
A few lawyers might have an issue with that.
Yeah, because failure could mean that I'm doing something wrong and I'm a bad worker, I'm a bad person.
Right.
Being okay with failure. What happens to the mind when you're suddenly okay with failing?
Well, here we are actually stepping into the dark side of the lawyer personality. So they have the drive, they have the perfectionism. Of course, you want a lawyer who's perfectionistic. I don't want any flaws in my contract, but there is positive and negative perfectionism. So the positive one is you want to do your very best. And once you've sent off the document, whew, that was intense. Let's hope it's all good. I've done my very best. And now I'm going to go off and have some nice leisure activities and, rest recovery kind of thing. And then you have what is the clinical term is maladaptive perfectionist, who is never satisfied with their own efforts. They doubt their own competence. It doesn't matter they got straight A's. They were kind of lucky, so they're always doubting themselves and they're always doubting their output, which means that they're never satisfied and they're never certain that what they've done is good enough. So they're always worried all the time. And you can't afford that kind of leakage if you're working in a business law firm with the long hours and the really high standards. So you need to have a healthy sense of self-esteem to ensure that you're really putting all your energy into the effort and not into the worrying.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a badge of honor for who can be the most worried about their perfectionism. And then you get all the
It's not
comparison
good.
mode. It's like, oh, no, I'm more perfectionist than you. There's a little bit of there's a beneficial quality to being a perfectionist because you're working on your craft, you're refining, you're constantly refining and you're adapting and experimenting. But like you said, to what end does that get?
Yeah.
And that's such a 180. It's such a different perspective to have, to be okay with failure, that failure actually refines your work, your performance more than the easy wins or worrying or anxiety.
Right. So one really important thing for lawyers is to check if they can internalize success. Many of them can't.
Say more about what you mean by internalizing success.
That the success that they rightfully achieve are becoming part of their identity. If you are a straight A student, then you are. Then you were not lucky. You worked hard and you were very talented. And it's nothing to be arrogant about, but it's also not something to downplay. You should have a healthy self-esteem and be proud over that.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of lawyers don't have that because they have a performance-based self-esteem. And you would be surprised how many partners are suffering from the impostor syndrome. So the impostor syndrome rises out of an inability to internalize your successes. So you have huge success in every way, but it doesn't rhyme with your self-image. So it feels like you feel like a fake, and you wonder, when are they going to find you out? And that becomes a huge source of distress. And it also blocks you from enjoying the success that you have in your hands, that you rightfully have achieved. And so it doesn't matter. You can become a managing partner and you're still not happy with what you have achieved because you can't internalize it.
Yeah. So let's say that someone is listening to this that is actually has a healthy perspective as a lawyer. They're one of the few gems in a huge law firm that they walk in, they do their best, they walk out, and they feel good, and they can have that healthy work-life separation. How do they have a healthy boundary with others that may be falling to some of these issues of maladaptive perfectionism or imposter syndrome? How do they relate to other lawyers who may not be taking those same steps?
Right. Yeah, that's tricky. For instance, if you're leading someone who has imposter syndrome or maladaptive perfectionism, there are some unique challenges with that. Because if you give them positive feedback, it just it's like Teflon because they can't internalize it.
Yeah.
And if you give them critical feedback, they fall apart because I knew it, I suck, I'm really bad. And you're just confirming that. And they can't really internalize that either in a constructive way. So that is tricky. I think it's really important not to fall into the games. So there is for instance, the 100-hour club, which is for all the people, all the associates who have billed 100 hours in a given week. And I say,
wow,
poor clients. I wouldn't want to be a client who's like, what do you mean you build 100 hours? I don't want to pay for that. That's ridiculous, But to create your own, keep your independence in that, and support all those around you, of course, and be that wonderful, emotional, stable and sociable and generous person that we see as success traits. And once you become a partner, you have incredible power to influence the up and coming junior associates and showing them what leadership can be, and that you can really be a cool, mature partner with a balanced life. You can have it all. It's incredibly difficult,
So
but you
lead by
can. You should
example.
go for it.
Lead by example. So basically
Yeah.
support others, and if you're able to work your way up, then lead by example, showing others that you can have this life.
Right.
Now, so we talked about the individual things that people can do to be more present. We talked about more of the relational aspects of supporting others. Now, what if you are the top dog and you can actually create top-down change? What can you do at an organizational level to take steps to maybe heal or make the best performing law firm? What can you do at an organizational level, whether that's in terms of selection, onboarding, professional development, or monitoring performance? What can you do at the top org level, the macro?
Right. I think number one is to empower the HR department, because in a law firm, you have fluid power and leadership that is being negotiated in a partnership. The partners are both leaders and owners, and there are a lot of them. So it's easy to have a few reactionaries that are blocking the progressive initiatives. And to point with your whole hand and just say HR is super important, because our greatest resource is clearly the people. Everyone agrees upon that. Well, who's taking care of the people? Well, that's the HR department. And then I think you need to make sure that every step of the talent management cycle, from recruiting to onboarding to training to leadership, you run it from a scientific point of view. The science is there. The science is showing that 3/4 of the success factors for a lawyer are not being trained in law school. They're not part of the curriculum. So you need to facilitate that. So all business lawyers are pretty good at legal skills, the legal aspect of it. There's great variance in terms of the stress management, the self-leadership, the leadership things. So if you want to stand out, if you want to keep associates, if you want to have really strong culture, then you provide all those other skills. And traditionally they're called soft skills. I prefer to call them facilitation skills, because they are the skills that facilitate the legal expertise that you're providing to the clients. So that's always, of course, number one. And then, of course, you need to be really, I think, clear when it comes to the whole Marlboro Man myth, the Grisham partner, the sort of bully kind of thing. That's just a thing of the past, and it's going to take time to weed it out, but do weed it out and provide leadership training, as I said earlier, before people become partners, and say, we want you to be a fully fledged leader before you become partner, because then you're going to not be as motivated and you're going to be really busy anyway. So we're going to support that all the way. And if you want to become partner, there's no way around becoming a leader.
Yeah, and to add on to that, there's a certain definition of leadership that needs to be ingrained. Because there's, like you said, there's a stigma of what a leader is, especially in law firms, and how can we change that definition of leadership? So when people say leader, they immediately think of someone who's present, who has a work-life balance or boundary, and who's able to work at ease with their perfectionism in a healthy way.
Right. So we all know that the young lawyers are asking for a more coaching leadership style. Well, what happens in remote working and hybrid is that the coaching style is becoming even more important. You need to help people to lead themselves, because you don't have that sort of office structure or discipline that a traditional law firm office is providing or helping people internalizing, they're sitting home alone. And so you need to help them help themselves. And you can only do that when you really connect and when you're providing that coaching. So the whole command control is just so 19th century,
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, you have such a wealth of knowledge in this area, not only as your experience with consulting with law firms, but also your own individual practice of what you do to make sure your attention is where you want it to be. What are some of your most trusted daily rituals, your daily habits that you do to keep your mind strong, resilient, or just to be in a place where you set up where you can be there for others and what you do?
Well, sounds boring, going to bed early and then rise early. Yeah, those are real basics for me, really important. And I found that to be easier to do during the pandemic because I have more energy. I don't need to sleep as much because I'm not as tired. When you go to and from office and you're meeting a lot of people, then that's very stimulating and exhausting, but also save energy when it comes to that. And then making sure if you look at my digital calendar, every block has a different color. I have different colors for different categories of activities. So for instance, green means, lunch or break or meditation or taking a walk. So at a glance, I can see, what is the mix of this work day? How much deep work am I planning? How much breaks am I planning? How many meetings am I having? And I can see immediately, whoa, my whole afternoon's back-to-back meetings. Well, I need to take that into account tonight. Maybe I need to take a long walk with my wife, or I need to do something else to really break it up and get out of the house. So I can see what needs are accumulating through my digital calendar. But
Yeah,
specifically when I'm time blocking, making sure that I have that healthy mix of the activities and that there is, for instance, the most difficult work is being done early in the day because my attention is really bad around 3-4 o'clock, for instance.
Yeah. So what I love about this is it's really against the old way of doing a task list, which is just listing out the tasks that need to be done, maybe not even in any order. So maybe I just kind of list out at the beginning of the day what I need to do. Maybe it's a list that I've accumulated through days and days and weeks and weeks. And so it's this long list. Some things are crossed out and I have to kind of look at that and say, okay, I have to do this today, this today. And then I'm looking at my calendar and seeing if I have any meetings. Okay, well, I can do this at that time. Okay, so let's just get into the work day. The difference is you're talking about is you have this color coordination too, which is nice. I haven't thought about you in that. So now I can take a bird's eye view and just say, oh, I have some greens and reds today. Okay, it's a good mix of green and red, green, red, green, red being meetings. So I kind of have an off on ability to kind of be on with the meetings and then take breaks, or it's all green. Oh, I can take in some of those long-term projects.
Right.
And it's easier to do that instead of looking and reading and trying to prioritize in your head.
Yeah.
Then you also mentioned time blocking. Now I'm a huge Cal Newport fanboy all the way for Cal Newport. I'll pre-order every one of his books. That definitely revolutionized a lot of the way that I work. And so maybe you can speak a little bit more on time blocking because people may not be familiar with that method, and it's very different than a task list.
Right. So with a task list, you look at what do you need to do, and you think that's what's driving you. But when you approach it from a time blocking perspective, you take into account that what's really limited is your time. The tasks are not limited; they are clearly unlimited. So how do you negotiate? How do you plan your day when your time is limited? And I think also some of the tasks we're doing that we are resisting, it's much easier to say, I'll just work for 1 hour on the contract. It really sucks, but I can do 1 hour and then I'll do something else. So it ensures that when you are, there is that great book, Thinking Fast and Slow, recognizing that you have the delivery mode in which you're working and delivering, and then you have the reflective planning mode. You need to make sure that those are really distinct. So when you are doing your planning, you do the sort of in-depth thinking, ensuring, for instance, that, okay, when you schedule that contract that you are resisting and procrastinating, that's what you'll do the first hour of the morning. Because once you get that out of the way, you will get energy from like, whoo, that was intense. I'm not
Mm.
done, but I've cracked it at least. I've broken that writer's block and I'm on my way. So you can take into consideration all sorts of aspects when you're actually reversing your scheduling and planning and basing it on time. And then when you're adding this coloring, then it really comes to life, I think.
Yeah, I like the idea of process goals a lot. People don't use process goals enough. They think, I need to finish this whole paper. But instead, what if you just spent 15 minutes on it?
Yeah.
I love lowering the bar of success. What if you spent 2 minutes working
Yeah.
on this thing that you've had stashed in the corner, not touching it for months? 2 minutes. And then boom,
Yeah.
you click that success marker and you feel great afterwards because then it adds up. So I'm a huge advocate of lowering that bar of what success means and getting easy wins, because then suddenly you'll realize, after a few days of running maybe half a mile, then maybe after a few weeks you go, whoa, I just ran 5 miles.
Right, right. And I think really important here is, of course, how do you manage your inbox at the beginning of the day? So you're supposed to be planning, and then you do deep work for an hour, and like, where does my inbox fit into this? And here I think it's really great. You can Google World Health Organization triage. So triage is when you have a hospital or you have like a medical setup, and then you get 100 patients at once, and you can't take care of them all at once.
Mm.
So you put labels on them. Okay, this is not urgent, this is semi-urgent, this is someone who might be dying if you're not giving them oxygen right now. So you start your day when you're doing your planning, you do a triage of your inbox, and you keep that sort of discipline. There might be emails in there that you need to respond to right away. You forgot to send a contract to the partner and now is really upset. Well, you clearly need to do that right now. But you make sure that you don't stay in the inbox for any longer than you have to at the beginning of the day, but you have also harvested any information you need in order to be able to plan the day in an effective way.
Yeah, I love inbox zero. Now, not for everyone, because some people, you open that inbox, we see 1,000 emails unread, or even worse, sometimes is 1,000 read emails, because
Yeah.
then you have so many things you just don't want to do and it piles up. But I love prioritization, sorting out urgent, not urgent. That's a simple one. Another one is the Eisenhower square. Have you heard of this 2x2, where it's important, not important, urgent, not urgent?
Right.
And so
But
then
my favorite is the resistance part, recognizing which tasks are you least comfortable with.
oh, I like that too. Yeah. What am
Because you might have really complex
I'm not?
work that you enjoy. That's not going to be a problem. But making that one phone call to the client or the partner saying, well, we lost the case and it's day 3 and you still haven't made it. Well, it's a 2-minute thing, but that's your biggest obstacle right now. So I always go by the resistance I have to tasks, and then I prioritize accordingly. Of course, importance is also part of it, but really the feeling for it.
Yeah, tackling resistance is a gateway
Yeah.
towards feeling amazing.
Yeah,
And
it is.
sometimes it's good to do a slow resistance. So like, okay, well, what's a little resistance? Let me build up my muscle. But then sometimes it's good just to go for the biggest dragon right away and chip at it, to at least chip at it to see
Yeah.
what's your baseline at.
Yeah, but then you need to pull out what I call the pressure cooker. So the pressure cooker is a working situation that has really the capacity to withstand high pressure. So if
Mm.
you take a pressure cooker, of course, you can raise the pressure, you can cook water at a higher temperature, which makes it possible to cook rice in 10 minutes instead of 20 minutes. So for me, the pressure cooker is going down to the library. I can't talk on the phone. Everyone else seems to be studying and reading books. I'm here because I need to write this thing and I have 2 hours to do it. And so I get into a flow and I'm not disrupted by others either. So it's both holding my escape attempts, and then also protecting me against others disrupting me when I have to really do this work. It's not something you can do all the time as a lawyer, but sometimes you have to be unavailable to get really deep work done. You
Mhm.
shouldn't be available all the time.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. And you aren't. When you're sitting with a partner or when you're sitting in a negotiation or something, you're not available all the time. It's just such a misconception of how you manage your work time. So have a clear idea, model, a blueprint. What does your pressure cooker look like? It could be Starbucks, it could be Park, it could be anything. But have that clearly, so it's like, whoa, it's 5:30, I haven't gotten it done, and you need to just call home and say, I need to use my pressure cooker tonight. Let's do something real nice tomorrow. I'll bring some takeaway food and a bottle of wine, but I need to get this done tonight. Sorry, I'll make sure it doesn't happen next week at least.
We share an affinity for like using symbolism and mythology to describe behavior in life. I think that's a thing that we mutually enjoy. So I love this image of the pressure cooker and playing with that. So we've talked a little bit about how to create maybe how to work with the external world to create a pressure cooker inside. Are there internal things that I can do? I know people talk about mindset. Sometimes it rubs me the wrong way to talk about mindset, but what are some internal things I can do to create more of a pressure cooker when I need to sprint? When I need to do that intense, deep work session?
Right. So first, you need to let go of your pride. If you need to block certain websites, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever, just block them. Don't try to resist it. It's like trying to go on a diet and then you have a bowl of chocolate M&Ms in front of you. Just don't do it. Put carrots or apple or something there instead. Make it easy for yourself. So make sure that the environment is really supporting you in that way, and that you've cleaned out anything that is making you set up for failure.
Yeah.
I think it's also good to have like a takeoff checklist. So my takeoff checklist in the morning could be, I need sparkling water because I drink a lot of coffee and that dehydrates me. And then I sometimes block certain websites. I make sure the desk is clean. You may even have a not to-do list, the things that you mustn't do that sets you up for failure. So that can be all sorts of interesting things as well. But when you do that, you control and remove factors that make you fail, but it's also initiating a certain mindset in a very concrete way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember I was really into writing out like what not to do, and so I put Post-it notes on my computer. Next thing I know, 2 days later, my computer screen is just loaded up with Post-it notes. It's like, oh my God, is there anything I can do? I'm like, oh my God. So
yeah,
it's good to fluctuate, right? It's good to fluctuate between that.
But that's the number one rule in mindfulness: don't trust your brain.
Yeah, it has lots of biases. Loves to bring up.
Well, you're sitting there, you're trying to focus, and your brain is like, "Hey, you're really focused, aren't you? How long have you been focused now? You're just doing great." And you're stuck in this story of how great you're being at focusing, but it's just like a sports event. You're not focused at all.
Yeah,
just caught up.
Wow. So you mentioned some boring things like sleeping and task lists. Are there any other things you've even done in the past, unusual daily routines that help with your attention? Maybe you do them still, maybe you used to do them when you're first getting into it.
Yeah, so for me, the greatest challenge in the pandemic is that I'm not a very sporty guy. I was always picked last in PE, and I was, when we played soccer, I was always score goals against my own goalie, and it was just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. So during pandemic, I found myself sitting way too much. But then I started thinking, hey, there are lots of things online you can do, yoga classes or whatever. But what's out there for me who doesn't really, I can't do anything at all. So I reached out to a friend of mine who's a professor in choreographics in Canada, and said, you should try Gaga. And I'm like, what the hell is Gaga? And it's like this really weird, contradictory dancing instruction developed in Israel. And it's so much fun because it's just sort of just the paradox of the instructions. You can't compete, you can't follow all the instructions because they're impossible, but because they're impossible to follow, you can let go. There's no failure. It's just sort of you interpreting really weird instructions in a sort of joyful way. So being able to do that a couple of times a week in front of my computer at home, I don't have to go to a gym or anything like that, has really revolutionized my relationship to my body in doing non-conceptual activities and making sure, the shoulders, the neck, all those things that we're struggling with when we're working from home. So maybe Gaga isn't for everyone because it's kind of absurd, but there are lots of alternatives. You can get a PT, or you can, yoga or whatever, but I certainly recommend Gaga wholeheartely from my own experience, and it will give your legal mind a great break, I promise.
Can you give me an example of what this is? Like, is it like a dancing thing where you're trying, is it an interpretive style or?
Well, it's just sort of like, grab your bones in your body and make a lot of circles with your limbs, and then they keep adding layers of instructions, add chaos to the grabbing of the bones in the circles that you're making, all sorts of things like that, which is just a truckload of fun. And then you do it with 100 people around the world on Zoom, and you can see their cameras and other people, old, young, all sorts of people doing it together, and it's just such great fun.
There's a huge benefit of being silly, of letting go.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
silliness and non-conceptual mind are just, or to not use the word non-conceptual, maybe just not thinking, not analyzing.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand with feeling free. That's why people love sports, who are not learning a sport. They already know the sport. They're able to let go then and play and lose themselves in the activity and commit full-heartedly to the activity without thinking too much.
Yeah.
So I think that's the essence of play. Essence of play is not thinking too much.
Yeah, getting out of the conceptual and the judgmental voice, and getting into the flow, enjoying the activities for its own sake.
Yeah, something that I've been doing that's kind of a little bit similar for my play has been going outside. My dog loves this backyard, and I play fetch with him a lot with tennis balls. So our backyard is covered with tennis balls. And sometimes I'll just go out there and I'll just start juggling. I'll just juggle two. I can't juggle well. I'll just juggle two balls. Maybe we'll put one behind my back and throw it up and then catch it. And so I've created
Wonderful.
a whole little training regimen of throwing tennis balls in the air behind the back. Sometimes my roommate will come out and we'll do some behind the back toss. And we just find ways to make it complex and fun.
Right.
And end up just falling on the floor laughing at how ridiculous this is. What better way for a break or for spending time than just laughing so hard you collapse into the ground?
Right. And it's so important with these high quality breaks, the way we take breaks instead of just, taking a break and then you check Facebook, to do these physical, creative, challenging, social, non-screen based activities, sourdough pizza, or throwing balls with your roommate or whatever it is, playing around with your dog. These things are so important now during the pandemic, more so than ever. So that's part of a really healthy lifestyle, to ensure that you have that. It's time to bring out the guitar, the board games, all those non-screen based social activities with your families or your friends or whatever you have, your cat, it doesn't matter.
And to remember that those things bring joy, because it's so hard to remember that when it's easy just to go stuck on Netflix and just keep browsing it and be like, it takes too much work to go do that other activity.
Yes, and having that sense of enjoyment is not a nice have, it's a must have if you want to have that long-term sustainable top performance rich success. You need to have the discipline to let go and allowing yourself to enjoy other things, because the brain likes variation. You're not going to do great legal work if all you're doing is thinking about it all day long. That's not healthy for your brain. You need to step out of it and go into other roles. You see that in research as well. The most successful lawyers, they have hobbies, activities, interests outside of the legal work. Even they work, 70, 80 hours. They have other things that is giving their brain variation.
Yeah, and we mentioned thinking fast and slow, right? Even when you're doing some other activity behind the scenes, without you consciously deliberating on it, might solve the problem. That's why our best ideas come in the shower. We're not thinking about things sometimes. We just let it flow, and suddenly, boom, insight.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It's really amazing how that can work out when you let go, and suddenly things just work out itself.
Yeah, and then you just need to figure out, can I bill my client when I took a shower and came up with the idea?
How am I gonna explain this one? Well, Jens, I think that's about all the time we have today. Thank you so much. It's a great conversation. We dug into a lot of different things, a lot of different practices, and I will definitely be searching Gaga later today to see what this whole phenomenon is. But again, thank you so much. You have such an excellent mind that you bring towards people, and I really appreciate your way of explaining things with simplicity and with a sense of kindness as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I just love this pod.